For the whole
And with that, guys, I'm going to turn things over to Hanne Pearce for her session. Um, so hopefully everybody's grabbed some coffee and some sweets to keep our sugar levels up. So Hanne, over to you.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? Yeah, okay, we're good. So good afternoon, everyone. After such a heated and important discussion, I feel a little bit like, oh, my presentation's just about teaching technology, but I will address AI just briefly. It's my pleasure to be here to talk about some of the digital literacy instruction that we've been doing at the Digital Scholarship Center at the University of Alberta. Firstly, just to introduce myself, my name is Hanne Pearce. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a digital scholarship specialist at the University of Alberta Library Digital Scholarship Center. And so what I'm going to be talking to you about today is one particular workshop series that I have developed over the last 3 or so years, together with colleagues, and talk a little bit about teaching media digital literacy, particularly media production, and how the technical skills are maybe not everything in that sort of digital literacy. So let's move along. What I plan to cover today, first of all, is I want to give you some context about the DSC and also our the series. And then secondly, I'm going to talk about media production and media skills and what they actually are. When I started at the DSC, I was just fresh out of finishing a master's degree in communications and technology, and so I have a background in communications. I did a lot of communications for the library. I'm also a freelance photographer and graphic designer, and I have been for 12 years on the side. So I have a lot of experience in the area of creating digital media. And then finally, I want to talk a little bit about the idea of technology versus technique and how just providing a tool is maybe not the complete story in all of this. So firstly, let's talk about what the DSC is. So here is the DSC. If any of you attended Access 2019, you would have come to the DSC. It was brand new back then. We were very proud. We had our hackathon there. Anyhow, we basically we occupy the second floor of Cameron Library, about half of the floor, and our facility includes study spaces, but also classrooms. This is our visualization lab where we have a very large screen, very popular classroom. We have a recording booth. We have a VR studio and also a makerspace. And so all of these technologies are part of my daily work in helping staff and faculty use these spaces and also to learn these technologies. So a little bit about what we do for our services. Firstly, instruction is a huge part of what we do, as a matter of fact, almost bulk of what we do right now. This includes everything from workshops, one-on-one instruction with users if they come to us with a need to learn one program or another. And then also we go into classrooms. So professors come to us and say, I want to do a project. Can you come and teach our students? Yes, so that's what we do. We also support researchers, so a lot of like grant assistance and tools, like advising on tools, what kind of tools to use for research projects. We provide tools, of course. On top of all of this, we provide makerspace with 3D printers, cutters, and all kinds of things. We have a high performance computing area where we provide access to software. And finally, space. So we also have 2 very large classrooms where we provide access for talks. People can book them, and we have study space on top of all of that. So we do quite a bit, but again, it's all focused on digital scholarship and digital literacy. All right. So when I moved to the DSC in 2019, I was coming from an information services role. And one of the things that we were tasked with was to start thinking about digital literacy instruction and what we could be developing as part of our sort of service offerings. And sort of my starting point, because I just finished a communications degree, was to look at my skills and say, okay, what could I do? And I thought a lot about the research cycle. I'm sure everyone's familiar with this cycle. If you work in academia, this idea of, learning the knowledge, asking new questions, producing new data, and then sharing it. And I'm very interested in in visual research methods, but I felt like an easy, low-hanging fruit was the research dissemination part, where a lot of people were already very interested in doing like podcasting, documentaries, videos, really mobilizing knowledge in a different way than just using academic articles. And so I thought this was a really good starting point, and that's where I started to sort of build our repertoire. So the first iteration of the research communication series that I proposed included digital photography basics, presentation and design, which was a workshop that looked at using design principles to create academic posters and presentations. So teaching students about, color theory a little bit and layout, and helping to make those academic posters look a little bit more visually appealing, and also using some visual communication skills. Video production basics is something that I developed with my colleague Sarah Jean Bellec, and the two of us have finessed it, but it was one of the first workshops we worked on. Our academic director Harvey Quammen offered a data visualization workshop in the series, and we did plan to do an audio workshop, but it wasn't really mobilized at that point because we were still building expertise in the area. So this is where we were at right about the time after Access happened. And then I apologize for the sort of cheesy graphic, but we all know what happened after that. Um, we suddenly found our lives completely changed, and we had to convert all of this to online. So we shifted to teaching these online live, and I also developed a couple of them as asynchronous courses that students could just enroll in and then work through on their own time. And this series actually got a lot of nice finessing over this time, because some of the making activities and some of the on-site activities, of course, weren't being done. And so we were really able to enrich the curriculum and really do some new things. So now we're here about 3.5 years later, and this is what the series looks like now. We made some changes. So we broke apart photography basics and video basics because we were always rushing through the content. And we decided we couldn't cover what we wanted to cover in them. So we took the editing portion out, and we now teach sort of the shooting and the start of the workshop. And then if they want to continue, they can come and do the editing part of it. Um, and we're also data visualization hasn't been offered very much, but I was bugging Harvey about that a couple weeks ago and saying, hey, you need to do some next winter. So we're going to reoffer those. And then I very recently did an advanced video techniques sort of workshop for an in-class. And so I'm repurposing that, and I'm making that into a workshop. So making my work for me two ways. I've made one for a class, and now I can just reuse that content. And we got some iPads when we returned on site. And I had a couple of consults with users who were like trying to create diagrams for publications, or presentations. And these weren't data visualizations. These were like, they needed to draw a theoretical concept, and they had no idea how to do this. And so I got this really great idea. I'm like, hey, let's use the iPads and Figma and maybe Illustrator and do a workshop on illustrating in an academic environment. And it's been very popular. So we get the iPads out, and everybody learns to trace and to make things in Procreate, and it's lots of fun. And there are some things in the works. So I'm really interested in doing some animation. I've had a lot of animation consults recently, and so I'm probably going to develop something around that. And also an advanced photography techniques workshop, because we are buying lights and we're thinking of building a small little photography studio, and it's going to come to fruition hopefully in the year to come. So, oh, and I should mention, let's go back. Being strategic up there at the top, that is the only non-technical workshop that we offer in the DSC. And that was born out of consultation work. I had people coming to me saying, I want to make a documentary, I want to make a video. And when I started to ask the normal questions that a communicator would ask them, who's your audience? Have you done any research? If you're going to do a YouTube channel, does anybody else have one? What are the messages? What channels do you want to use? And I would get like deer in headlights. And I realized people don't know in academia don't know how to create communication plans. And so I got this idea and I went to Lydia and I said, hey, can I do this workshop where I take the communication plan design and I put it in the academic environment? And it's been very popular. It fills up every time I offer it. And in fact, I'm doing it on Monday to a bunch of faculty members. So it's non-technical, but it covers basically the idea of thinking through your communications and making a plan so that when you do go to do the arts-based research project, the video project, the documentary, whatever it is that you're planning to do, at least you have some kind of a plan in front of you. So these are some of our media kits, which we've developed over the last little while. So what you have on the left is a mobile video kit. So it includes a gimbal, an attachment for a tripod, and a lavalier microphone, and a few little tools that really help to make mobile video work much better and easier. The one in the middle is, of course, a DSLR kit with some video capabilities. And the one on the far, I guess your guys is right, would be the podcasting kit, the mobile podcasting kit. So if they're not able to come and use our recording studio because they're going out into the field or have to interview somebody like can't come in, they can take that out with them. And these are used for instruction and are also we circulate them to mostly participants of our workshops and classes that are doing special projects. So these are available to leave the DSC. So what then are media skills and how do you teach them? So when I started to propose this workshop, I just was using my own experience as a communicator, as a photographer, as a creator of these things. And I started to jot down what I felt needed to be covered. And so actually I should back up. These are some of the questions that we get asked on a regular basis when it comes to media. So things like, I want to start a YouTube channel. Is there an easy tool that will teach my students stop animation? And one of the most common sort of trends in all these questions is that users are really looking for a tool that's going to do it for them. They want, what's an easy tool that my students can use for XYZ? And that isn't necessarily possible. You always get these like, can you teach my students ... And then will an hour be enough? And it's like, you want me to fit a 10 years worth of like photography experience into an hour? Okay, I'll try. So I think my challenge was, can I teach stuff that isn't tech? Like, should I be teaching this stuff? Because this is what I wrote out as my curriculum for the workshop. Now, I should note these are 3-hour workshops. So these run for an afternoon or a morning, depending on what works for my schedule. And so some of the things that I included, of course, that are very important is, how does a camera work? Mobile phone cameras, because students don't always have access to DSLRs. So we have to address sort of the mobile phone cameras. And then, of course, the exposure triangle, how do you use the manual mode on a camera? But more importantly for me as a photographer is this understanding of the terminology, which really goes back to photography history and how photography was developed. And then there's this problem of light and composition and how to see as a photographer. And so when I started to look at this list, I'm like, only like half of this is technical, really. And so here's another example. Here's a photo editing workshop. So the problem that I came upon is that, like, you need to address the elephant in the room with photo editing. Is this ethical? Should we be doing this? And what is photo editing? How long has it been done? Because there's a lot of perception out there that Photoshop was the first thing to introduce photo editing, and it's been done, like photo manipulation's been around since the photography. So addressing these kinds of things, and also this, in order to be a good photo editor, you have to mimic a certain realism, and you have to talk about this idea of verisimilitude, the appearance of realness. And so photography has a complex relationship with reality and what is truth. And so you have to have these conversations in order to understand why pushing your saturation all the way up to the max is going to move your image from being photography to being art. There's no wrong or right about it, but you have to understand the limitations of what you're doing. So again, when I categorize these into technical, non-technical, again, we're looking at about half are technical. And video basics, just as a final example, when Sarah Jean and I decided to design this workshop, we said, okay, what's important when you're doing a video project? What do we do when we do these videos? Well, you have to plan, you have to have a script. Like, how do you even get through a project without one? And we thought about taking it out. How do we do we just jump into Premiere Pro and just show them how to make a video? Well, you can't really, like, you have to give them some kind of guidance. And so again, if you start to look at how things shape up in terms of technical versus non-technical, again, you're looking at half conceptual. So this is an analogy or an example that I use in my photography workshop, uh, where I tell the students to imagine that they've gone to a wonderful dinner party. And the food is absolutely amazing, kind of like here where we've had wonderful food, okay? Imagine poking your head into the chef's space here and saying, you know, the food has been wonderful. You must have a great oven. Why is it that some technologies we put the responsibility of the creating on the actual individual, and some technologies we expect the technology to do it for us? If I could have a nickel for every time as a photographer I've been told, you must have a great camera, I would not be here right now. Okay, I would be in Barbados. Okay, so I think what we have to realize is who is doing the doing. Um, we've we've had this tradition of technology and libraries. Providing access to technology is something we've done for decades. But we put the thing there and we just sort of say, okay, there it is. But are we actually, if we're going to venture, and now that we are venturing into digital literacy, are we actually, by providing just the tool, giving them everything that they need? If we're going to do digital literacy, we may have to go all the way or a little further than we think, anyways. So when it comes to media production, it's not just about making things look good. It's about visual communication, right? And so in academia, we do a really good job of teaching people textual writing and communication. And so these students that come into my workshops, they've never really had to think of how would you do that with a picture? You get crickets when you ask them, how would you do that with a picture? And so basically taking images or creating these media objects is not just about making things look good. It's about actually having meaning and saying something with them. Video editing and video creation, for example, is creation of meaning. One concept I'd like to introduce to students is the Kuleshov effect, which is this idea that two clips put together will have a different meaning than if you see them individually. And this is something that's proven by montage. And montages are these things that you see in every like Hollywood like musical where they dance for a while and you see snippets of stuff. And if you'd only seen one of those clips, the meaning of the whole thing wouldn't have the same intention. And so this is what I'm getting at, is that understanding what you are doing, not just how you are doing it. And finally, with illustration, for example, not everybody needs help with the how do you do it. Quite often, it's a question of what do I do? Their concepts are so complicated. I had a student who was trying to do a presentation on a centrifuge. He was an engineer and he didn't know how to explain how the centrifuge worked. And so we spent a lot of time talking and he tried explaining it to me because I'm a non-expert audience, and him trying to explain to me like what it is his research was. And then I worked through metaphors and analogies that he could use. And then we thought about what kind of images would reflect those analogies so that he could actually communicate his research. So it's not so simple as just say, here's InDesign, make a poster. And so what about AI? Well, it's here to stay. It's been around and it's already being incorporated into these tools. Adobe pushed out a recent update that includes a generative AI model that will fill backgrounds and actually place generative images within your images by by inserting text. I've played around with it, and I think it is here to stay. But as some have mentioned, the visual AIs are still, in terms of photography in particular, are not so great. We're still getting 6 or 7 fingers. We're not always getting what we want. And I think it is going to get better. I think eventually it's going to reach a point where it is really, really good. But then the problem becomes, prompt engineering. How do we actually tell this thing how we want it, what we want it to do? And then you need to know the terminology. You need to understand, like, narrow depth of field, shallow depth of field. You need to know portrait, landscape. You need to be able to talk about how to frame it in order to get the image that you want. And so again, you need to have some knowledge of the conceptual elements of media production in order to even generate things. So and this is really hard for me to see, and I'm sorry, this is how I um yeah, and I think the final point about this is that research is still going to demand human created objects. Is that there's eventually going to be some limitations on what you can use for your research in terms of generative AI. So I think it's going to get faster. I think that video editing, like doing a rough cut, is going to be a lot faster. I think we're going to be able to expand our images and fix mistakes a lot easier. But in terms of how good this is and how fast that happens, I can't say at this point. I'm still playing myself. So getting to sort of the point of what I'm trying to sort of say, I think, is that it's not just about the tool and this idea of tech versus technique and how we have to consider technique as well. Now, the idea of technique was sort of first brought forward by Jacques Ellul, where he looked at how technique had become, in his view, technique was something that technology had produced, and we become so obsessed with efficiency that we're basically like, now our function is to just be as efficient as possible. And I think to some degree this has happened. We are focusing on the efficient, how fast, what tool. If I click this button, will it do it for me? Why is this so difficult? Why do I have to move the clips over here? And everybody wants it to be fast and efficient. And we're not thinking about the human element, the actual, what are we saying? And so the challenge is, of course, getting the users on board with this, getting the instructors on board with this, and understanding that you can't just have an hour to teach them how to make good videos, because they may not good videos. I could teach them Premiere Pro, or I can teach them how to plan their videos in an hour, but I can't do both. So very much like our keynote speaker said on the first day, sometimes you have to learn to know what you're going to give up and what you're going to keep. But I'm going to hang on to my conceptual ideas until you try them from my cold dead hands, because I think it is so important. And my colleagues are also considering these types of things. This is from a quote from my colleagues' article, where we're looking at the power dynamics of these tools as well, and how they're not always accessible, and uh, financially and otherwise they're not always accessible, and there's all kinds of power dynamics with these media tools. A lot of students struggling to get sort of access to Adobe, even, which is an industry standard tool, and it's becoming more and more expensive. And while I live and breathe Adobe because it's the tool I use and what I've learned, it's getting more and more expensive, and it's getting harder to use. I'm looking at alternatives. I'm looking at DaVinci Resolve. I'm looking at other alternatives because it's getting too hard for people. So I'll probably use Adobe for my own uses as long as I can, but the alternatives have to be explored because it's just becoming inaccessible. So in photography, depth of field is one of the hardest. Like, I should back up. One of the hardest concepts to learn in the photography workshop is the exposure triangle, which is the use of aperture and shutter speed and the sensitivity of your sensor, the ISO, to create a well-balanced image, to create a good exposure. And aperture is the function that allows you to decide how clear and in focus and how deep the range of focus is in your image. And so I'm using that as my analogy for how we have to think a little bit about how deep our training has to be when it comes to these media technologies. Is it enough to just, okay, there it is, here's an introduction, here's how you turn it on, and we leave them at it. If we are doing that, then we need to change what we're calling it and not call it digital literacy, because I don't really feel that they have a grasp of what to do with it when they leave. And we need to again, I'm struggling to see this. Yeah, we need to consider our pedagogy and planning, and just really slow down, urge them to slow down a little bit. I know they want a tool. I know they want a button. I'm at a library technology conference telling us not to just teach technology. I can't believe I'm doing this, but I think it's what makes the use of the tool that much more richer when they finally get to the end of it. So we have to persuade users to be willing to sort of go with the flow and be open to some of the other things that we're teaching them, not just the technical stuff. I think we really need to break down this perception that the young generations know everything about media production, that, oh, we're going to give them this. They do TikToks. They must know how to do this. Uh, they may know how to like clip it together or roughly, and or maybe take some really cool like, you know, transitions or something. But in terms of like putting something together and saying something and developing a thesis statement, not so sure. And then also nurturing expertise for the non-technical elements as well amongst staff, and saying, you know, yeah, let's read an article about this. Let's talk about, you know, what's involved in this particular technology and teaching it. Is it just about how to manipulate the buttons, or is it about more? Is there things that we need to give the users so that they have a good grasp of it when they go to use it? So 514 participants later, the proof is in the pudding. I find that a lot of students come back. They go to other workshops of mine. They stop by to say hello. They bring me things that they have made, which is the most rewarding thing about this, is that they're like, oh, I want to show you the video I made, or I made this animation. And it is just so wonderful to see them creating with the skills that you have given them. So I want to thank my colleagues, Sarah Jean Belec, who really has helped me. She's teaching because I'm not there. So she's teaching my presentation, design and presentation workshop. And Lydia Zergentseva, the head of digital scholarship services, who's always game when I say, hey, I have a new scholarship, I have a new workshop idea. She's always willing to listen and let me give it a try. So um, I am willing to address any questions. I don't know how we are for time. Thank you.
Hi there. Thank you for your great presentation. I'm Stephanie. I work at York University, and I just had a question. So when you're going into courses and you're teaching these various skills, do you know if the faculty members are engaging with like an experiential education framework where the focus is not necessarily on maybe like expertise in terms of using the technical tools, but there's like a reflective component as well as to like how the technology made them kind of rethink how they might create an analogy or a metaphor or describe their research output in a different type of medium. Because like I feel like that's also another important piece too, is like we're not necessarily expecting them to be like video production experts or photographers at the end, but we do want to incorporate that reflective piece into these types of assignments. I feel like that's one of those other things that's missing too.
That's a really good idea. We do work very closely with the instructors to, of course, get the parameters of the assignment so that we can provide the instruction. But like I said, I'm always trying to push a little bit of that conceptual stuff in there, because I try I try everything I can to try and fit some of that in there, because I just think it's so critical. But you're right. Thus far we haven't talked about that with instructors, but it's a very good idea. Yeah.
another York person, and I'm back again, unfortunately. Sorry, you have to hear my voice so often. But I sit adjacent to our media creation lab at York, and many of the things you were saying, I was like, oh my goodness, we do something very similar. But your ideas were very good. So I guess my question to you is something that I see happening a lot within our media creation lab is that folks struggle a lot with setting boundaries and timelines with faculty members when doing that kind of incorporation of the media creation lab into their coursework, which is difficult. And that's partially, because, policy needs to be there. But I was just wondering, how you deal with those kind of issues as they arise.
So I need to clarify the question. Are you concerned about like the time of the media lab and like people doing sort of last minute things, or are you thinking more about like they're in their planning stages of the project and sort of, I'm not entirely sure.
Sure. I'm just talking more about like boundaries that you might set in terms of planning the project and then B kind of dealing with like last minute things that may come up.
Yeah, and see, that's one reason why we like, for example, with the we find that with video projects, and I have helped some students who like they think too big, and that's why I do that pre-production part no matter what. I might skip the scripting a little bit because scripting is something that students can write. They can typically write, but planning how and when you need to have everything done. And also thing I also tell them is editing is going to take 2 times as long as you think it's going to. And that you have to plan at least a week for your editing because it's finicky. You're making a rough cut and then you're fiddling with things and moving things around. And so if you leave the editing to the end, you're really lost. So yeah, I think it really depends on what level of student you're dealing with and what kind of assignment. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of like planning, like there are a lot of potential planning nightmares there, and we try to address them as best we can. But yeah, I think that I think really just addressing that pre-production planning that's so critical. And one of the things that I find so astonishing is that students will like say, "Where do you plan to film your video?" Because you need permission, right? Like you can't just go anywhere and film a video, right? And they get really astonished when they realize they can't do this. So the who, what, when, where, why, how, because the DSC only has 2 video kits, or we can't, we need to coordinate this. So yeah, for sure, planning real problematic sometimes.
Right. Yeah, well, thank you so much for that, Hannah.
Thank you.
And